All right. Well, it is officially 3 p.m. Central Time. So we'll get it started. My name's Jacob Eckeberger. I'm with You Specialties, and I'm just kind of the giving you the nuts and bolts of what's happening today. So we are so excited to have Stephanie with us. She's a small church youth ministry guru. I've been bragging about that for a while, so she's definitely gonna live up to the name. Um, and also representing YS, being the voice, the lovely face and bald head of YS is Brian Aaby. And so he's going to be.
Bald head. Man, there's good coverage there, Stu. I just choose to shave it this
Yeah,
way.
well, do that again. I can count them.
That means
So
that
can the
you've got
Lord, Stephanie. So can the Lord.
my, that means you've got a good amount of youth ministry years under your belt, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to hand it off to Brian to just kind of get us started. And again, we're going to be picking up your comments on our YouTube channel. So if you don't have that, you can grab the link in the email I sent you, or off of Twitter or our Facebook page, and follow it there. And we'll do the Q&A towards the end, but we'll kick it off with an interview that Brian's going to handle. So take it away, Brian.
Thank you so much, Jacob. And just so you guys know, we have just the most fantastic social media guy out there with Jacob. He's done just a ton. And if you're following on or not following yet, YS underscore scoop, YS underscore scoop is, and Jacob, you could probably put that in, post everything so that everyone sees it. But he's tweeting out some great stuff, great blog posts and stuff like that for You Specialties as well. So hey, Steph, it is so exciting to be hanging out with you. Stephanie and I go way back. We've had quite a bit of ministry experiences together, doing some consulting together and hanging out at national conferences like NYWC. And so when Jacob asked if I could do this interview, I was pumped. So Steph, welcome.
We can't say.
Yes.
There's some things we can't tell.
That is true. But we will both be enjoying our coffee. I've got some questions for you, Steph. If you don't mind, I'm gonna just kind of start firing at you, and we can kind of have a conversation. And as questions come up for our watching audience, I would love for them to just write those in to Jacob, and he will make sure that we get them so that we can be asking those two towards the end. So, hey, give us a little framework on you. I'm looking over this way just because I have my external monitor here. How'd you become a writer, speaker, expert, consultant, and kind of give us that minute kind of framework of what brought you to where you are now?
Well, what started it was I got to write a few articles back, even 20 years ago for a youth ministry magazine, and started, I've been in youth ministry since Jesus was in my youth group, but so I've been in youth ministry like 34 years now, and started writing some articles, and I began to serve a church in 2003 that was a small church. I had gone from serving with large youth groups, 200 plus kind of kids, and then I went into the ordination process within my faith tradition and started serving in a small church where there were 9 students. And I didn't know what to do with that. 200 students to 9 students. And I was like, gosh, what's out there? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to study. And I kind of just started asking people, and a friend of mine, Rick Lawrence, said, well, there's not much out there. Why don't you just start writing it? So I started writing it, and based on my experience with them. And then in the later 2008, I started working for an organization called Ministry Architects. For those of you that don't know, it's a company owned by a guy named Mark DeVries, who wrote Sustainable Youth Ministry. And I worked for them for a while and managed not to get fired. And the small church thing was just kind of growing and growing and growing. And Mark said, why don't you start a small church division for us? And so between putting out some books about small church youth ministry and writing a blog about small churches and just by outlasting people, I think, Brian, here's where I am. You
Yeah.
know,
And I know
if
exactly. I know Mark well enough to know exactly how that conversation went. It was not
yeah,
just Stephanie do. It would be Steffi. Why don't you just
yeah,
go ahead and start that little organization for us?
that's right,
So,
Steffi.
so tell me. I mean, I get this. Now, what are you most passionate about for small groups now? Like, you get to go and consult with them and stuff like that. If they're overarching, what are you most passionate about when it comes to small church?
Yeah, because my world in small church ministry, there's a lot of pieces to it. I consult in small churches through ministry architects. I'm doing a lot of training with small churches, like at National Youth Workers. I'm working with a lot of regional offices doing like these year-long cohorts. And I think if I were going to name the thing I'm passionate the most, that would be helping small church people feel like we can do it. We're
Mm-hmm.
not inadequate. There's nothing wrong with us. The average church in America is only 76 people. There's as many smaller as there are larger. The average youth group, is like 7 to 8 students. So these folks think that maybe they're doing something less than best, and the
Mm-hmm.
reality is they're the majority. So I really like just helping them feel good about what they're doing. They don't have to compete with the big guy. They can just be who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once they get a little bit empowered and encouraged by that, then they start being able to sort of incorporate the youth ministry basics that help them be sustainable.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Stephanie has 99 Thoughts for Smaller Church Youth Workers and also another book, Thriving Youth Ministry in Smaller Churches. And so as I've gotten to see those books, and Stephanie, when she and I connected several years ago, I let her know too, I'm passionate about small church. In fact, as a youth pastor for 17 years, the majority of my mission trips were sent into rural, smaller communities where those averages that Stephanie just named are specific to the places we went. And that, 100
Yes.
people or less in the church and 10 kids in the youth group. So the question that I have for you is, thinking of those youth leaders that maybe right now are watching this live or watch it later on YouTube, when you think of that Joe or Shelley, youth group leader, volunteer in those smaller churches, what's the most common encouragement that you find yourself giving them?
What a great question. Well, first of all, what I just said, that you aren't the out of the norm, you really are the norm. The
Mm,
second thing is I know what I would tell them. Never, ever compare yourself to the big woo-hoo
mm,
church down the street. Don't compare yourself to the church of what's happening now that's got 150 students going and blah, blah, blah. First of all, most of the time that's a little bit of urban myth about how successful that big church down the street is. And secondly, I've I've done consultations in those big churches, and they've got as many problems, if not more, than the small church does. So I
mm.
would say small churches, just celebrate who you are, embrace what it is you do well, don't worry about the other guy, just do the best you can, raise the bar in quality of what you can for the students you have.
Mm.
That
It's
make
good.
sense?
That's a good word. It's a good word, and I love watching Stephanie in situations where she's getting to encourage those youth leaders, and she's got this kind of special Mama Caro. You guys
That's
just saw come out right there, and I'm looking forward to seeing that at NYWC National Youth Workers Convention. Stephanie's going to be both in Sacramento in October and in Atlanta for us in November. Can you give us kind of just a sneak peek at the seminar that you're going to be leading there, so that maybe those that are still picking what seminars they're going to go to would want to come to yours?
Well, what we'll hit first of all is we'll go through a little bit of the numbers. Some of the numbers I just said and what's happening in averages. And the reason is because that does help them go back to their church and say, hey, we are normal. We are better than we think we are. Then the second thing I usually go through, and it's an hour and 15 minutes worth of time, So I try to cover 2 or 3 commonalities in things we all struggle with. And that is, one of them is volunteer development.
Mm-hmm.
Every ministry struggles with that, having enough volunteers, how to recruit them, how to manage them, how to retain them, how to get rid of them if you need to. So we look at that a little bit. And then another area I usually cover in that amount of time in a workshop is, so since most of the small churches don't have professional youth workers on staff, how can they make their teaching, their Sunday school time, their youth group time, their small group times better quality? How can you make your teaching times better?
Mm-hmm.
And so some tips of, how to make it more engaging, how to be more experiential, so that students feel like, we may only get to meet on Sundays at Sunday school or Wednesday nights. We may not have all these programs, but the programs we do have are really well done,
Mm-hmm.
and the adults who lead us are good at what they do.
Yeah.
So those are usually 2 or 3 of the topics I cover.
That's awesome. I saw a hunger for it just 2 weeks ago. Mark Matlock, YS president, and I were at Creation West speaking, and the majority of the youth leaders that were there were the small church youth pastors, youth leaders, bivocational. One guy I remember is a warden at the prison in Oregon, and so he's 50 plus hours, and he said, I meet with these kids on every Sunday morning, every Wednesday night, and here's the thing, I know how to love these kids, I don't know how to teach these kids, and so he's faithful and showing up, but doesn't have the Bible knowledge, background, and stuff. And the cool thing is that with everything out there in youth ministry land, there's great curriculums, but sometimes we need somebody like you, Steph, to just help us to know how to apply those curriculums, because sometimes you can get those curriculums and still not know how to do that. Will you touch on that during your seminar too? And
yeah, I think we will, because one of the things that's important for people to know is how students learn best.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still so much of not only youth ministry, but ministry across the board that's so lecture-based, but that's not how students learn. Students learn best when you engage all of their senses. And so when I let kind of folks in on the inside of what some of the statistics are about their students, and like the average student, for an example, the average 10th grader needs their teacher to switch up mediums like every 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they don't, they start tuning that youth pastor out. And maybe they're polite and know how to nod and pretend like they're listening, but they really aren't. Exactly, Brian.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh.
Hey, give
so
us.
That.
Give us. I'll give a sneak peek for all those that are attending NYWC. You're going to see Stephanie, and not only in her own seminar, but you will see her hanging out outside of Starbucks, and there's a great one there in Sacramento, and you're going to be hanging there, and I'm going to see you, and every 30 minutes I walk by, you're going to be sitting with somebody new. Give us a sneak peek at what. No, I don't want to give any disclosure to confidentiality, but kind of what are some of the things that you find yourself doing with those one-on-one appointments? What are the people needing to hear from you? And
that's my favorite. That is my favorite. Well, first of all, it's a cheap way to get people to buy me Starbucks. But I learned this from a friend of mine, Andy Brazelton, and he said one time before a big conference, he said, teachers, leaders, exhaust yourself relationally. Don't just teach your class and then go hide in your room. And so those times are for me just to sit, and really I wind up just doing more listening, and I might throw out a couple of Mama Caro ideas. I'm in love. I kind of just try to shoot it straight, and I think they walk away. I hope they walk away feeling like, okay, I've got a plan when I get home. Here are some things I need to do. And so, with those folks, sometimes maybe they just need an objective person that knows youth ministry still, that will call the spade the spade.
Mm.
We'll just
Yeah.
say, hate to tell you, friend, but here's what's happening.
Yeah.
Or, hey, you're doing a great job to stick at it. And so I'm just kind of, that's one of my favorite things.
Cool.
That and hanging out with you, Brian.
Thanks so much. So the question that I would say, there's a lot of commonality in youth ministry, and there would be people that are ministers in large church settings. Some that are probably watching this right now that make the argument that youth ministry is youth ministry, whether it's small church or large church. And we can say relationally, yes, that's true. Can you name two or three of the major differences between ministering in a small church and in a large or medium-sized church?
Yeah, I can. Because you're right, students are students. And to be honest with you, I don't think students have changed that much in the 35, almost 35 years I've been in youth ministry, which is fascinating since I'm only 37. But I don't think students have changed that much, and how much they just want to know that people love them. The difference between large church ministry and small church is that in a large church setting, you have a wider net of people to pull from. For an example, say you want to put together an expert video of your mission trip. You've got 1,000 people in your church. You're going to have a video guru that's great at editing. When you have a church of 80 people, you just have less of those opportunities. And so I find a lot of it's in resourcing. And the other thing that even catches me by surprise is I still run across in the cohorts that I work with that there are some people, some churches that need to go back to the basics. What happens at a typical youth group? I don't know. What do you do at youth group? And they have to ask those in safe settings. Because if they ask them in a setting where the big giants of youth ministry are, they probably wouldn't ask those.
Mm-hmm.
And so with small church, you never assume that they know something, and you want to gently walk with them. And the other thing is that they just have less available.
Yeah.
If I said, well, do you go to National Youth Workers Convention? They may or may not have heard of that because the stuff doesn't come across their desk because they don't have a desk at the church. So that's one of the big differences.
Yeah, which is actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask, and I'm just going to give this as kind of one of my last ones, and we're going to go to the Q&A from people as well. But speaking of the National Youth Workers Conventions, some could say the same thing, that this is really for the big church. This is really for the happening youth group, in the larger cities and stuff like that. How can something like NYWC benefit a small church? And maybe there's a small church elder or senior pastor watching this and going, should I really prioritize the dollars to send my lay youth leader to this type of thing?
It's a great question, because to send a team from a small church, that's a big expenditure. But it's the best and quickest way to educate a team of lay people, especially when you don't have the quote-unquote expert youth worker on staff. So I think you look at what your church and your ministry needs. You look at all those things that are being offered, and you divvy up who needs to go to what. Now, one of the things I would love, but I don't really know how, I'm just so glad to be there. I wish there were more time at National Youth Workers focused on just small churches, so we could have at least 4 hours maybe to pour into them, or 8 hours, kind of make it a college course crammed all together, because these folks generally don't get to go to a conference very often. Having said that, I think divide and conquer, taking good notes, maybe getting recordings, and then sharing them with the whole team back at church is the best way to go for a small church.
Love it. That's awesome. And it's really cool to look at the first question that Jacob sent our way from Aaron Tucker, kind of a combo. I'll kind of take the two questions that are listed here, which you kind of started to answer anyway, the translation from big church and stuff. But I'm going to ask the second part of it. What kind of filter do small church youth workers need in place as they read, watch, consume youth ministry that a lot of times can be perceived as just for the bigger church? And how do they help apply, a book that Doug Fields wrote, that maybe the perception is that's for the bigger church. How do they apply those principles? What kind of filter do they need for a small church setting?
Well, for an example, one of the areas that's just simple mathematics, a lot of the game resources that you get, they're all written for being able to play them with 25, 50. So a game book, knowing how to do the math for when you have 6 kids come.
Yeah, not every church in this rural community or small church has the inflatable, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. And so I'm looking at Aaron's question and how to filter it. Some of it is you have to learn how to filter the curriculum yourself, but one thing that mathematically could work if a youth ministry was looking for curriculum to teach is to take a curriculum geared towards small groups, not small church youth groups, but small groups. It's already geared towards having 6, 7, 8 students, and then use it because it's already got activities and questions, etc., designed for that number. Even though it's really a curriculum, written for 10 small groups, but it really kind of mathematically already works. Another question Aaron asked here is, why is there a larger amount of books written for the big church stuff? I think it's a little bit because it's easier to get resources to larger churches. The mail, the link, the advertising gets to those large churches because they've got a staff person, whereas a small church person, never really sees it. So that's the big question: is how to get resources into the small church hand, and it usually means getting to the pastors somehow. Because either them or the church secretary, because they're the ones that are keeping it or throwing it away.
Those are the gatekeepers right there. Yep.
Yeah, those are the gatekeepers.
So another question that's come in from a brand new youth minister. Welcome. What would you recommend to that new youth minister who's still trying to figure out youth ministry? And as he's trying to figure it out in a small church, what are some of the resources or people that you would want to connect that person to? What are some thoughts there, Steph?
I would say this: if I could only read one book about youth ministry, it would be Sustainable Youth Ministry by Mark DeVries. Because it's very practically driven, it's results driven, it's got stuff in it that'll just keep you from getting fired. Because you know what I'm saying?
That's the goal. That's the entire goal.
It's the goal. Yeah, we want to teach about Jesus, but we don't want to get fired. Sustainable Youth Ministry just has solid, practical words of advice, systems and processes to put in place so that a person new in youth ministry doesn't make those newbie mistakes that a lot of youth workers make, and then they do get low and you never let go, you never see them in youth ministry again. And so it helps you with some of the administrative stuff that then allows you to be really relational. If I could only read one book, that would be it. I still think, though, that Doug Fields' book, My First 2 Years in Youth Ministry, is also really helpful. Then
I always think that the Bible's good, too.
Oh, yeah. You would say that, you Bible reader. Yeah, the Bible's a good one. Okay, good.
We've
Yeah.
got a great question here from Aria, and I'm gonna tag on. I sent out some tweets and put it on my Facebook page earlier today for people to ask questions, and Shane actually, who Stephanie knows as well, IM'd or text messaged a question. It goes right along with what Aria asked. Aria says, "How do you develop a youth ministry when you have a handful of teens, 4 or 5, who attend inconsistently and aren't committed to our God?" And then I'm gonna put the second part of that question with what Shane asked me too, and that was to say, how about parents who are not committed to getting their kids to youth group, and maybe prioritize sports and other activities for their kids instead of getting them there. So how do you deal with the low attendance and non-committal aspects?
Well, in going to that first question from Aria, how do you develop a youth ministry when you have a handful of teens who attend inconsistently? Um, First of all, 4 or 5 teens is enough, but I understand if only 1 or 2 of them show up. You know what you do? You plan activities and you plan gathering times that work with 1 or 2 or 4 or 5.
Mm.
And you just have to be solid. You never cancel anything. You never cancel an event due to lack of critical mass. You build those numbers the way they are. And I think a lot of times it means looking for the best ways to attract them. Instead of, if you've got 4 or 5 students, don't meet in a big old dusty aging church. Meet in somebody's home. Meet at Starbucks, to where 4 or 5 doesn't feel so small. Then, because you know how students are, they want to be connected to something that feels successful. And so you have to kind of help that success factor along a bit. As far as parents go, gosh, isn't that the age-old question? How to get parents more committed. When they, it's so funny when parents say, but my child is so busy, you don't understand. My child's in this and this and this and this. And my first reaction is to say to them, can I ask you, Mom, who signed all the permission slips? And that that sometimes doesn't go over well. But you know what? Every church youth group in America, every youth group's kids are too busy. But yet some youth group kids choose to still attend youth group. So it's not about the sports, it's about whether they want to be at youth group or not. From a practical standpoint, a lot of it's about calendar. When you plan things too last minute, anything that goes on the calendar less than 6 months in advance, I just think you're taking a risk. If you want your kids to go on a youth retreat, but yet they play soccer, they got to know 9 months out that that's going to happen, and they can tell their coach, hey, this is important to me.
Yeah, it's interesting when I'm with my new role with Youth Specialties, YS Search, we're helping churches find the right youth pastor, and not all those are big churches and things, but
Right.
I've done probably 50 interviews in the last 2 weeks for one of these positions, and the most common question I ask, or answer to a question that I ask, what do you like about youth ministry and what do you not like? I would say 80% of the youth pastor candidates have said they don't like the admin. And so you just nailed it, and I hope every youth pastor hears that if you're not planning things out in advance, 6, 9, 12 months, and having those things on the calendar already, doing that little bit of admin will go so far for you. And one of the questions that we won't be able to get to, but Josh asked about keeping leaders engaged and getting them to understand the importance of youth ministry. And my word of advice, because I do want to get to this last question, my word of advice is just take a day, a month, or every 2 months and just fully administrate the next few months out, even a year in advance. And you'll see that parents start connecting more, students understand what's happening next, leaders will get on board, especially if they know what their role can be within that. This last question, Steph, from Chris Coker. We're a church of about 150 with 20 to 25 students, and his question really is the 6th or 8th graders love the youth ministry. They are the majority of the youth group. How does he keep the senior hires engaged and involved when the majority of the group is those 6th through 8th graders?
Well, here's where he's at. I can see his question. And so, hi, Chris. I met Chris doing a training event a couple years ago. He's at a magical number. He's got 20 to 25 students involved in some ways. And so in Sustainable Youth Ministry, Mark talks about the rule of 30. When you get to around 30 students, and so Chris may be beginning to feel some of the struggle of his numbers, I'm not so sure that once you get to 25, 30 students, you ought to be thinking about maybe they need to meet separately anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could really be time for that. You know, you do some things together, but you know it's true. A sixth grader, especially, you know, this time of year, new sixth graders coming in, they're so cute and wiggly.
So small.
They're so smart. And you've got a senior in high school who now has to figure out where she's going to college. Of course they shouldn't spend that much time together. Their lives are completely different. And so in Chris's case, with his numbers, it might be more about how do they connect and when should they be separated. To spend hard. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Jacob, how'd we do, man?
You did great. I loved it, and we're right on time. We'll be just about a minute or so afterwards. So thank you so much for walking us through the interview and the Q&A. And Stephanie, thank you so much for all of your time and all of your commitment to youth workers.
Fun. Great.
Yeah, well, we loved having you a part of this, and for everyone watching, there are a couple of other questions that came through on the comments, and I am going to snag Stephanie and Brian afterwards and get some written responses from on those comments. And so when we repost the video this next week, we'll repost it with a little bit of extra response on those questions, so that way everyone can get an answer on it.
And anyone can email me anytime. Email me.
Yeah.
Send me questions. No problems.
Why don't you just mention out your email, and I will type it in the comments as well.
I'm typing it right now.
All right.
Stephanie.Caro@ymarchitects.com.
Perfect.
Spell it right? There.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think you spelled your first name right. I think so.
Yeah, I think the architect's part I always get wrong.
Cool. Well, thank you and watching. I just posted Stephanie's email so that you can reach out to her if you have any other questions, and I'll follow up on some of those other comments as well. And don't forget the National Youth Workers Convention. The deadlines for registration for some really great savings opportunities are coming up this next week. So head over to nywc.com. You can see lovely Stephanie in person and get to know a little bit more of her incredible personality and hear her.
Yes, I'm adorable.
Yes, you are. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we will follow up with new content on all this stuff soon. So
awesome. Thanks, Jacob.
See ya.
Bye.